Okay, folks, today we're going to talk about two memoirs by high-level American politicians. One written by a politician at the absolute highest level, a former American president, Barack Obama, and the other one written by a U.S. senator who may soon become vice president under Donald Trump, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance's memoir, HILLBILLY ELEGY, was first published in 2016 when J.D. Vance was 31 years old, and it turned him into an instant public figure. Some people say that the book helped explain Trump's win in the presidential elections that year. J.D. Vance describes the book as the history of opportunity and upward mobility viewed through the eyes of a group of hillbillies from Appalachia, and it kind of gave the wind to the sails of his nascent political ambitions, although he never held official office until 2022 when he was elected U.S. Senator from Ohio. The other book we're going to talk about today is Dreams from My Father, a story of race and inheritance, which was first published in 1995 when Obama was 33 years old, after he became the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review. J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School, by the way. And then Obama's book was republished in 2004 after he sort of came out of nowhere to win the Democrat primary for U.S. Senator from Illinois with basically no campaign budget. And then he went on to beat the Republican nominee. And then we all know that 4 years later, he revolutionized American politics by becoming U.S. president at 47 years old, which is a stunning achievement. I mean, basically, he finished his presidency before he reached my age at 56 years old. The book was a modest success when it came out. There was some buzz around it, but as Obama himself says, the sales were underwhelming. He describes it as a boy's search for his father, and through that, a workable meaning for his life as a Black American. It also talks about his beginnings in U.S. politics, and the book remains perpetually relevant because Obama remains perpetually relevant. I mean, who knows what strings he's still pulling in the Democrat Party, or the Democratic Party. I mean, he might be the most famous man in the world. Both of these men have been accused of being frauds and traitors. Both of these men are loved and hated. Both of these men have had their biographies used against them. Both of these men have had ridiculous lies invented about them that supposedly intelligent people believe and propagate. Or maybe they don't believe them, but they propagate them. Recently, there's this rumor of this passage in HILLBILLY ELEGY where J.D. Vance has intimate relations with a couch. I've seen a passage supposedly from the book shared on Twitter and retweeted on Twitter to corroborate this. The passage is not from the book. There's nothing remotely like that in the book. It's amazing to me that so many writers who claim that J.D. Vance sucks as a writer, are themselves not good enough readers to recognize AI-generated text. That's what it seemed like to me. And then as far as Obama, you know, there were all the lies about him not being born in the U.S. and about him being a practicing Muslim. And then more recently, there's all that crap about his wife Michelle being a post-operative transsexual, and slightly less outlandish that Obama is secretly gay. Now, the secretly gay rumor stems from a letter that Obama wrote when he was 21 years old to an ex-girlfriend or girlfriend from college. This is not in the memoir, by the way, but the letter does exist, in which he says, or which he writes about his androgynous mind. And he says that he makes love to men daily, but in his imagination. That's the quote. Now, using that to prove or to suggest that Barack Obama is secretly gay seems like a bit of a stretch to me. I mean, between the ages of 20 and 30, let's say, I very often imagined making love to men to kind of feel out my sexuality. I mean, you might even say that men who don't experiment that way, perhaps out of primness or disgust or so-called moral rectitude, are actually afraid of who they could be attracted to, which is by definition homophobia. It turned out I wasn't gay, but I wanted to know if I was, and if I was, to what extent. And I suspect, I can't obviously know for sure, but I suspect that perhaps Obama was doing the same thing. But anyway, let's get back to the memoirs. They help us understand the truth about these two men. If we want to know the truth, I suspect that there are a lot of people out there who don't really want to know the truth about one or the other of these men because they're too wrapped up in partisan politics. But anyway, onward. Obama's father, Kenyan of the Luo tribe, basically represents the whole shebang for his son, both nature and nurture. When he's a boy, his mother, a capable, well-off, middle-class white woman, tells him, your brains, your character, you got from your father, or you got from him. He also got his name, both first and last, from him. Obama's father came from Kenya to study at the University of Hawaii, met Obama's mother, they got married, and had young Barry. That's basically his name in the book. And then 2 years later, his father left Hawaii to study at Harvard, and then went back to Kenya to take a high-level position in government there after Obama's mother divorced him. The book is never really clear on why his mother divorced him. And then 8 years later, when Obama's 10 years old, his father returns to Hawaii to visit his ex-wife and his ex-wife's family and young Barry during Christmas, and for a month. And it's basically, this is the only time that Obama remembers spending with his father. And that is a really wonderful section of the book. There's a wonderful scene where Obama's father comes to speak to his 5th grade class, and Obama's certain that he's going to be embarrassed, and everyone ends up loving his father and admiring his father. And then there's this tremendously moving scene where just before Obama's father's departure, he puts a record of African music on the stereo, and he dances to it with his son. And basically from that point on, his father becomes his fate, right? He writes, even in his absence, his strong image had given me some bulwark on which to grow up, an image to live up to or disappoint. When later, after his father dies in a car accident, he learns from his African half-sister about his father's drunkenness and stubbornness and conceits and his neglect of his wives and his family, Obama has to sort of revise his notion of his father. And he writes, where once I felt the need to live up to his exploits, I now felt as if I had to make up for all of his mistakes. And then to further complicate the matter, his grandfather, his father's father, basically was a traitor to his own people. He slavishly tied himself or allied himself to the white British colonialists to then establish himself as an educated, rich, and influential farmer who treated not only his wives with contempt, but even his own people, saying things like, the African is thick. For him to do anything, he needs to be beaten. This is a guy who, when he decided to convert from, let's say, his tribal religion, he chose Islam instead of Christianity because he didn't believe in forgiveness. You kind of get the sense that Obama realizes that he has blood ties both on his white side and on his black side to, as he puts it, that institution that paid for its privilege with the profits of oppression. To me, it's fascinating conceptually that through acting and reacting to his father, or the notion he has of his father, or to his father's people, that he discovered, defined, and developed his character and interests. I say that it's conceptually fascinating because that part of the book, that gets into his Kenyan roots and where he goes back, or he goes to Kenya to visit after his father dies, it's just poorly done from a literary standpoint. The rest of the book isn't. The rest of the book is well done from a literary standpoint, but that part, basically the last third of the book, we're talking like 160, 170 pages, seemed lame to me. And not because he didn't have the material, it's that he just didn't know how to package it, he didn't know how to tell it in a way that that moved me in a deep way. It read to me sort of like amateurish, sentimental autofiction. J.D. Vance names and incorporates more influences in the formation, definition, and development of his character and outlook. There is his intelligent but emotionally weak, drug-addicted, and ultimately manipulative and perverse mother who he spent his entire life running away from. There is his older sister, Lindsay, and his maternal grandparents, Mamaw and Papaw, who were born and raised in Appalachia and basically protected him from his mother's insanity. And he really did live some horrible shit under her watch, none of which he claims victimhood for. And then there was what he calls the revolving door of father figures, all of his mother's love interests, who she lived with, and who treated him decently, according to him. And the most influential of those was his biological father, who was a God squatter. And his, let's say, reductive Christian fundamentalist viewpoint at first attracted, but then repelled J.D. Vance. And then there was his time in the Marines and his stint in Iraq, working, I think, in public relations, where he learned to replace what he called learned helplessness, a kind of mind virus that he attributes to a certain element of his people, to replace that with what he calls learned willfulness. And then finally there was his time at Yale Law School, when he learned the importance of what he called social capital, which is basically connections, or, you know, how and through whom to get the information necessary to move ahead. J.D. Vance takes a lot of heat for how he outrightly claims to be representative of what he perhaps loosely calls hillbillies. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, first of all, Hillbilly Elegy is just an outstanding title, and I think the term legitimately applies to him, considering who really raised him, his grandparents, and the trips that he took back to Appalachia with them. But perhaps what made him a target to critics is that he dared to criticize hillbilly, or a certain aspect of what he believes to be a certain aspect of hillbilly culture. When he is in high school, he takes a job as a cashier in a local grocery store, and he begins to notice things that upset him. For example, he writes, "I could never understand why our lives," by which he means his family's lives, "felt like a struggle, while those living off of government largesse enjoyed trinkets that I only dreamed about." And then he writes, "We began to view much of our fellow working class with distrust." Now, I think it's very important to listen to how he words this next quote, okay? "Most of us were struggling to get by, but we made do, worked hard, and hoped for a better life. But a large minority was content to live off the dole," right? So most were admirable, but a large minority were not. I mean, I think that sentence can be applied to basically any group of people on Earth. And yet he's been attacked, okay, for selling cheap stereotypes and for blaming Appalachian hillbillies for their poverty. Basically, critics claim that he simplifies the causes, but I don't think he simplifies the causes. I think critics simplify his book. Okay, as an example of J.D. Vance's subtlety, which very few critics give him credit for, I'm going to read you a passage from the book about drug addiction, which, as I've mentioned, his mother and therefore his family was very detrimentally affected by. Okay? He writes, "Drug addiction was a disease, and just as I wouldn't judge a cancer patient for a tumor, so I shouldn't judge a narcotics addict for her behavior. At 13, I found this patently absurd, and Mom and I often argued over whether her newfound wisdom was scientific truth or an excuse for people whose decisions destroyed a family. Oddly enough, it's probably both. Research does reveal a genetic disposition to substance abuse, but those who believe their addiction is a disease show less of an inclination to resist it. Mom was telling herself the truth, but the truth was not setting her free. Again, mom was telling herself the truth, but the truth was not setting her free. That seems to me like a very subtle and sophisticated way to get the heart of something as complicated as drug addiction and overcoming it. I mean, some things are not our fault, but we still have a responsibility, or it's still our responsibility to try and overcome them. And we can overcome them, at least to a certain extent. I do not think that Hillbilly Elegy, generally speaking, is a simplification, or that it's selling cheap stereotypes. This is not AI, folks. This is not artificial intelligence. Okay? Everything you get on Book Rants is the full organic truth. I was doing the video, I wanted to take a break, so I went to the barber, and I came back to finish the video. Same man, same ideas, different look. That is the magic of YouTube. That is the closest you're ever going to get to special effects on this channel. And if that doesn't make you subscribe, then I don't know what will. Okay? Anyway, I think that Obama is the better writer of the two, at least on a sentence level. But as I've kind of hinted at, this gets him in trouble later in the book because I think he overestimates what his rhetorical gifts can pull off. Even so, in the first part of the book, Origins, when he writes about his childhood, adolescence, and college years, and also, a little bit less, but also in the second section of the book, Chicago, which is about his grassroots beginnings in politics, where he worked as a community organizer on the South Side. In those two parts of the book, Obama can really kind of thrill us with his prose, okay? But in the end, the most impressive achievement of the book is not Obama's storytelling, it's not his stylistic flair, it's the way he portrays the plight of Black Americans, their situation, their suffering, without pulling punches, but at the same time allowing white people to take it without feeling attacked or unfairly accused. He writes about what he calls the hunger of all Americans for any optimistic sign on the racial front. A morsel of proof that after all some progress has been made. And you know, I sometimes wonder if that is Obama's greatest achievement as a human being and as a phenomenon. You know, he is a decisive and authoritative, but not threatening Black leader and reformer. His charisma and charm, in person and on the page, allows white people to consider certain stances that they might otherwise reject out of defensiveness. Okay, some examples. When Obama's white grandmother, Toots, is especially frightened by a panhandler because he's Black, Obama goes to speak with or to consult with this former Black militant, this bohemian, this poet named Frank, who's a friend of his grandfather. And Frank says to Obama, "Your grandma's right to be scared. She understands that Black people have a reason to hate." Or there's this wonderful section where Obama is starting to assimilate into what he calls swaggering American manhood. And he's doing that by playing pickup basketball on turf, as he puts it, where Blackness couldn't be a disadvantage. And then there's this great scene when he's in high school and he's speaking to his friend Ray. Ray is one of the few other Black students at this kind of upscale prep school in Hawaii. He's a transfer student from LA. And Ray starts complaining to Obama about how all the girls are racist because they don't want to date him, and how the basketball coach is racist too for not playing Obama more. And this is how Obama responds. He says, "All right, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying, yeah, it's harder to get dates because there aren't any Black girls around here. But that don't make the girls that are here all racist. Maybe they just want somebody that looks like their daddy or their brother or whatever, and we ain't it. I'm saying, yeah, I might not get the breaks on the team some guys get, but they play like white boys do. And that's the style the coach likes to play. And they're winning the way they play. I don't play that way," right? And then Ray responds to him, "Your shit's getting way too complicated for me." And that's the thing about Obama, right? He's not afraid to get complicated. He doesn't simplify either. You know, he doesn't, in the book, delve into his whiteness per se, but he obviously empathizes with the white sensibility. And speaks to it indirectly by understanding us, by not letting the slights that he experienced because of the color of his skin, which are also very well described in the book, keep him from giving white people the benefit of the doubt in most cases. But at the same time, he doesn't budge on the stance that, the black man is always playing in the white man's court and by the white man's rules. And just because he's among the half-breeds and college degreed, as he puts it, and didn't come from an underprivileged background, that didn't mean that he was going to leave his race at the door and always smile and be courteous and make no sudden moves, he writes, okay? Taking a hard stand on race, while at the same time not making white people feel as though they're excluded from the solution or feel too ashamed for the sins of their fathers or too ashamed for the cachet that comes with the color of their skin. I think that is Obama's greatest achievement as both an author and as a man. Hillbilly Elegy, in addition to being a memoir, is also a social and demographic summary, let's say, of the mass migration of the Appalachian people to the newly industrialized Midwest after the Second World War. The book has clear ambitions to make a strong statement about this phenomenon. And you can imagine how this would rankle the academics, who tend to qualify everything they say or write to the point of neutering it, okay? It also seems to me that J.D. Vance set out to write a work of inspiration as much as a work of literature, a kind of, if I can do this, you can too type of story. There's a line in the opening chapter. He writes, I didn't write this book because I've accomplished something extraordinary. I wrote this book because I've achieved something quite ordinary. And this is where I have a bone to pick with J.D. Vance, because I just think that statement's untrue. J.D. Vance isn't and never was a normal guy. He criticizes a certain element of his people for believing that hard work doesn't matter as much as raw talent. His book is supposed to dispel that notion, but I think his book actually corroborates that notion. I mean, as a boy, he loved to read. As a boy, he loved to do math problems with his grandfather. In high school, although his grades were mediocre, in his spare time, he read books by eminent sociologists to understand better what being disadvantaged meant. Okay, like Obama, his situation and his obstacles drove him to read, to understand it better. That's just not normal in a teenager. Okay, after the Marines, where he stood out, despite not having a college education, for his organizational skills and his communicative skills. Okay, after the Marines, he graduated from Ohio State with a double major, summa cum laude, okay, in 1 year and 11 months while working. I mean, guys like J.D. Vance and Obama just are exceptional human beings, and exceptional human beings, when they decide to work hard, okay, their strides of advancement are off the charts, and this encourages them to work even harder and so on. And I think this at least partially explains both Obama's and J.D. Vance's astronomical rise and success. Okay, these are not everymen. And so for J.D. Vance to present his story as, if I can do this, you can too, it just reads like false modesty, and it undermines his thesis statement and his credibility. I mean, a guy like J.D. Vance, with his intelligence, with his drive, with his resilience, is just going to see payoff sooner than the average person. There's a part in Hillbilly Elegy where he writes about Obama. He says, Obama conducted himself with a confidence that came from knowing that the modern American meritocracy was made for him. I mean, that statement, that exact statement, can be applied to J.D. Vance, and not just now, but when he wrote the book. And the book doesn't really acknowledge the fact that the modern American meritocracy wasn't made for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone. I mean, very often, hard work and good decisions and agency doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter for generations. And so this is my main criticism of Hillbilly Elegy. It seems to be dishonest in the most essential piece of his memoir, who he is. It's just disingenuous to me for him to play himself off as this kind of run-of-the-mill guy when he, just like Obama, are on just another level of human performance. To sum up, both of these memoirs, written by politicians, really written by them, okay, before they became famous, which doesn't happen every day, got me thinking about the question posed in one of these memoirs, Hillbilly Elegy. J.D. Vance writes, "How much of our lives, good and bad, should we credit to our personal decisions, and how much is just the inheritance of our culture, our families, and our parents?" This is a key question for our times, because the generally accepted belief is that nurture, not nature, that our social circumstances, not hard work and talent, either hold us back or launch us forward. Both of these men overcame their circumstances to accomplish extraordinary things. J.D. Vance decided to align himself with the conservatives, which, in his own words, err on the side of detachment. And Obama decided to align himself with the liberals, which err on the side of, let's say, permissiveness. There is definitely a sense in Vance's book, okay, that our own personal advancement depends on us, okay? J.D. Vance writes that it lies almost entirely with factors outside the government's control, and that our lives will only improve through better decisions. And I don't think that Obama's book would dispute that. In fact, there's a scene where he's talking to the son of one of his co-workers when he was working as a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, Kyle, this black kid. And Kyle, when he was a younger child, dreamed of joining the Air Force. But as he gets older, one day he says to Obama, the Air Force would never let a black man fly a plane. And Obama says to him, this is the quote, he says, "Man, that's the wrong attitude. You can do whatever you want if you're willing to work for it." Okay, that is a line right out of J.D. Vance's playbook, okay? The right attitude, being willing to work for it, going for it, okay? That's what J.D. Vance would term engagement. The thing is, how do we foster engagement with the disadvantaged and the marginalized? J.D. Vance points out, correctly I think, that people of privilege, let's say, or the elite classes take for granted knowing the steps or who to ask for help in order to get ahead. And that one of the main reasons why the disadvantaged don't engage is because the way is not cleared for them, which is different than, let's say, getting a free pass, okay? There's a scene in Dreams from My Father that shows or dramatizes how connections, what J.D. Vance calls social capital, can radically transform the life and future of someone who was born without that social capital. All right, it's in the Kenya section, and it's a scene where Obama's father is being shunned by his own father, and he's living in Nairobi without a job and without prospects, okay? And he meets these American women who are working there, and he makes friends with them, okay? And they begin to loan him books, okay? And they see how smart he is, and they tell him that he should go to university. And he expresses interest, okay? And so they begin to show him the steps. They arrange for him to take a correspondence course so that he can get a secondary degree. And then they look into what colleges might be interested in him. And then they write him recommendation letters. I mean, Obama's father did the work, okay? But they pointed the way, which was relatively easy for them. And look what it set in motion. I mean, look what it led to. The Barack Obama phenomenon. I mean, J.D. Vance is right when he says that lack of knowledge and lack of intelligence are not the same. I mean, Barack Obama's personal and family story bear that out. Success and advancement are partially a matter of luck, of the social circumstances that we're born into, but they're also a matter of kindness and of solid direction and of talent and of hard work. Okay? J.D. Vance writes, one way our upper classes can promote upward mobility is not only by pushing wise public policies, but by opening their hearts and minds to newcomers who don't quite belong. Right? Small favors, okay, by people in the know can have huge results with people who are eager but uninitiated. Okay? For those people who dismiss J.D. Vance's memoir or Obama's memoir for being fraudulent or self-aggrandizing or hokey or not worth serious consideration, I almost consider them anti-opportunity, which might be another way of saying anti-American.